It all really started the day Sophia and I were driving up to my dad's house. It was a long ride, and honestly, I had way too much time to think. Maybe that's where things went sideways. You ever get that feeling when you're stuck in a car for hours, and your mind just starts wandering to places you'd rather not think about? That was me. And where did my mind land? Right on my marriage. Yeah, Sophia and I. We got married young. Way too young. I was 23, she was 22. We barely had a clue what we were doing. Anyway, we were heading to see my dad, David. He was 45 and getting remarried. This was his second marriage. Mom had passed away years ago after a long battle with cancer, and now here he was, about to marry Laura, who, fun fact, is actually 4 years older than him. She's 49. I couldn't wrap my head around it. After everything with Mom, you'd think he'd want to take it easy and live out the rest of his days in peace. But no, there he was, jumping into another marriage like he hadn't learned a thing from the first one. And then there's Laura. She has a daughter, Emily, who's 27, and married to some guy, Mark. Honestly, no one even knows how old he is, and, frankly, no one cares. He's a total mystery, and not the good kind. As we drove, I found myself staring out the window, my mind spiraling. Sophia and I had been married just over a year, and already things felt off. We argued about the dumbest things. Like, I'd leave a dish in the sink and she'd flip out. Or she'd nitpick something I said, and before we knew it, we were in this ridiculous shouting match. Honestly, part of me started to think we rushed into it. But maybe that's just what young people do when they think they have everything figured out. At one point, I turned to her in the car and asked, "Do you think we rushed into this marriage?" She gave me that look, the one where they don't want to answer because they know they're about to say something that could either upset you or open up a whole new mess of issues. Yeah, that look. But instead of avoiding it, she said, "Ryan, we're fine. Marriage isn't easy, but we're in it together, right?" Sure, I thought. It didn't feel fine, though. Maybe I was overthinking things. Or maybe it was her acting distant lately that had me questioning everything. She wasn't the same person I had fallen in love with. When we finally got to my dad's house, I had to admit, it was nice, really nice. But it was one of those places that just felt like there was too much going on behind the scenes. My dad came out to greet us with a huge grin, like he was trying to convince everyone, including himself, that this wedding was the best thing that ever happened to him. Laura wasn't far behind, putting on that same fake smile. But the real kicker? Emily. She barely said 2 words to me or Sophia. She was cold, distant, like she couldn't care less about this whole new family situation. And honestly, I didn't blame her. I felt the same way. Who were we kidding? Pretending this was some perfect, happy family dinner. That night was beyond awkward. The dinner table felt like a battleground of forced small talk, and no one wanted to address the huge elephant in the room. My dad marrying someone we barely knew, and everyone pretending everything was fine. Emily sat there, quiet as a mouse, while Mark kept checking his phone like he had better places to be. Sophia, on the other hand, was putting on a show, trying to act like the supportive wife, but I could see right through it. We were falling apart, and I was too scared to admit it. After dinner, we went back to our room. Yeah, we were staying overnight, which, looking back, might have been the worst idea ever. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept going over the past few months, replaying all the fights, the cold moments, the way Sophia would always be on her phone at random times. I don't want to be that guy, but part of me wondered if there was something I didn't know. But I quickly shook it off. Just paranoia, right? Maybe I was projecting my own doubts about us onto her. But that gut feeling? I couldn't shake it. Something was off. I turned to her and asked, "Are we really okay?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at the ceiling for what felt like forever. Finally, she turned away from me and said, "We're fine, Ryan. Just go to sleep." Yeah, right. Fine. The next morning, things felt just as weird as they had the night before. I don't know if it was the tension in the air, or if I was just too stuck in my own head. Either way, I needed to clear my mind, so I decided to step outside and get some air. That's when I ran into Emily. She was already out on the porch, sitting with her coffee, looking just as disconnected as I felt. We started talking, and before long, the conversation turned to our parents' whirlwind marriage. It felt like they barely knew each other before deciding to get married. Neither of us was okay with it. It's too fast, I said, shaking my head. I mean, I'm happy Dad's happy, but this whole thing feels rushed, like they didn't even think it through. Emily nodded. Exactly. My mom never even mentioned dating after my dad passed, and then suddenly, boom, she's married again. She paused, staring into her cup. It just doesn't feel right. I agreed, and as we sat there, I found myself opening up to her. Maybe it was because I knew she was going through the same confusion I was, or maybe I just needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't Sophia. I told her about my doubts about my marriage, how Sophia and I got married too young, too fast, and how things between us just weren't the same anymore. Emily looked at me quietly and said, I get it. Mark and I don't know what's happening anymore. Lately, Mark's been acting so strange. He's distant, and honestly, I don't even feel like I know him anymore. There was something in Emily's voice that really stood out to me. It wasn't just sadness, it was suspicion. She didn't say anything directly, but she must have sensed that I was catching on, because she started sharing more about Mark. She told me how he'd been staying late at work, coming home smelling like a perfume that wasn't hers, and how he'd started acting secretive with his phone. Classic signs, right? She didn't need to spell it out for me. I could tell she suspected he was cheating, and as much as I hated to admit it, I started to wonder if maybe I needed to start paying closer attention to Sophia's behavior too. The whole day felt like it dragged on, and that conversation kept running through my mind. It was like Emily had cracked open something inside me, a voice that had been whispering doubts about Sophia for a while now, but I'd been too scared to listen. And then it happened. I was outside, walking around the backyard, trying to clear my head. I wasn't really focused on where I was going, just lost in my thoughts. And that's when I saw them, Sophia and Mark, standing way too close. At first, I couldn't even process what I was looking at. My brain couldn't make sense of it. But there they were. And before I could even react, they kissed. Not just a friendly kiss, but something else, something intimate, something I'd never seen from Sophia before. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart dropped. It felt like someone punched me in the gut, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to look away, but I just couldn't move. My feet felt frozen to the ground, and I stood there, staring like an idiot. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like forever. Confusion, anger, betrayal, all mixed together. I wanted to storm over and confront them, demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, or maybe I wasn't ready to face the truth. Either way, I stayed hidden for a bit longer before I quietly slipped away. My mind was racing. How was this happening? What was Sophia doing with Mark? I kept trying to make sense of it, but it didn't add up. The woman I thought I knew was out there kissing some guy who was married to Emily, no less. It felt like my whole world was crumbling around me, and I didn't know what to do next. I made my way back to the house, feeling like I was on autopilot. My hands were shaking, and I was doing everything I could to keep it together. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to notice something was wrong. I wasn't ready for that conversation, at least, not yet. So, I forced a smile and went back inside, trying to act like everything was fine while my mind was falling apart. I knew I had to talk to someone about it. But who? I couldn't go to my dad. He was too caught up in his own situation with Laura. Sophia was obviously out of the question, and there was no way in hell I was talking to Mark. That left Emily. She was the only one who might understand. The only one who could help me make sense of what I'd just seen. Later, I found her alone again, sitting on the steps of the front porch, staring off into the distance. I sat down next to her, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure how to start, but I couldn't keep this inside anymore. I saw something today, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Something I really wish I hadn't seen. Emily turned toward me, her eyes full of curiosity and concern. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I saw Sophia and Mark together. They were kissing. For a moment, Emily's face went pale. She didn't say anything, just stared at me, like she couldn't believe what I just said. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. I knew it. I fucking knew it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had a feeling something was going on, but I didn't want to believe it. I nodded, feeling the same way. Neither of us wanted to accept this reality, but there it was. It was staring us both in the face. We sat there in silence for a while, processing what we just uncovered. Our worlds were falling apart, and neither of us knew what to do next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dinner that evening was supposed to be normal, but there was no way it could be after what I just witnessed. I knew I had to talk to Emily more about it. I couldn't keep this inside anymore, and she was the only person who might actually understand. She had to know. But there was this weight in my chest, like if I said it out loud, it would make everything real. There'd be no going back after that. Everyone was busy preparing for dinner, so I decided to take the chance. I found Emily in the kitchen, moving dishes around, but her mind seemed somewhere else. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to approach it, but I couldn't waste any more time. I just said it. "I saw them," I blurted out. Emily froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She didn't even turn around at first. I could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide for a moment before a look of bitter understanding washed over her. "What do you mean?" she asked, but I knew she already knew the answer. "Sophia and Mark," I said quietly. "I saw them in the backyard. They were kissing." The words barely left my mouth, like saying them any louder would somehow make it worse. For a long moment, Emily didn't say anything. She just stood there, letting it sink in. Then, after what felt like forever, she let out a quiet, bitter laugh. It wasn't a laugh of humor. It was more like someone finally having their suspicions confirmed. And it hurt like hell. "I knew it," she said, her voice low and sharp. "I fucking knew it." I stayed silent, unsure of what to say next. What could I say? We were both stuck in this mess, and there was no easy way out. Emily walked to the sink, staring out the window like she was trying to find some kind of answer in the darkness outside. "I had a feeling something was going on," she said quietly. "Mark's been acting weird for a while now. He's always out late, glued to his phone, and coming up with excuses. I didn't have any proof until now." She paused and met my eyes. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "Part of me didn't want to know, but I'd rather face it than go on feeling like I'm losing my mind." The two of us stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, sharing an unspoken understanding of the hurt we both felt. It felt twisted, but it was something. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was completely alone in this mess. We started talking, really talking. She told me about her marriage to Mark, how it had never really felt right, even before the wedding. She admitted she never loved him, not in the way someone should love their partner for life. It had been more like they ended up together because it seemed like the thing to do at the time. But now, all she felt was anger and regret. "I've been angry for so long," she confessed. "Angry at him, angry at myself for staying. I knew something was off, but I kept hoping things would improve. Now, I'm not so sure anymore." I nodded. "I get that," I said. "Sophia and I, it's been the same. The arguments, the distance. I keep thinking maybe we rushed into it. Maybe we weren't ready for this." There was something oddly comforting in knowing someone else was living through the same kind of misery. It felt like we were both sinking, but at least we weren't sinking alone. I had no idea how much time had passed while we stood there, unloading our frustrations, regrets, and anger. The kitchen felt like a completely different world from the rest of the house. We were in our own bubble of hurt and betrayal. Then, something shifted. It was subtle, like a spark in the air between us. Emily turned toward me, her eyes hard but searching. "Without warning," she said it. "If they can do it, why can't we?" The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. At first, I didn't fully understand what she meant, or maybe I didn't want to. But then, she stepped closer, her voice soft yet sharp. "Ryan, why should they get to hurt us, and we just sit back and take it? If Sophia and Mark can betray us, why can't we do something too?" I was stunned. My heart raced, and I didn't know how to react. This wasn't what I had expected. But, as crazy as it seemed, I understood what she was saying. The temptation was there, nagging at me. I felt a desperate need to escape the pain, to feel something other than the weight of betrayal and anger. "We're both hurting," she said, almost pleading now. This could be our way out, or at least our way of getting back at them. If they can cheat, why can't we? I should have said no. I should have walked away, but I didn't. Maybe it was the anger. Maybe it was the shock. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted to hurt her the same way she had hurt me. Whatever the reason, I gave in to that pull. Before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't like with Sophia. This kiss was raw, desperate, a reflection of the pain we were both trying to escape. Our hands roamed, and before long, things escalated. We were tearing at each other's clothes, driven by a need for release, not love or attraction, but revenge and an escape from the moment. As it all unfolded, I realized what was really happening. Emily and I weren't just trying to get back at our spouses. We were looking for some kind of control in a situation that had torn our lives apart. This was our way of taking something back, a sense that we had a choice, even if it was the wrong one. We moved to the guest room, barely managing to shut the door behind us. We were lost in the moment, overwhelmed by emotions we couldn't control. Just as things were about to go further, the door slammed open. Sophia stood there, her eyes wide with shock and fury. The door hit the wall with such force, I thought it might fall off the hinges. There she was, face twisted with disbelief, anger, and maybe even betrayal. Her eyes flicked between me and Emily, as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Are you kidding me, Ryan?" she yelled, her voice trembling with rage. She stormed into the room, fists clenched by her sides. "You're cheating on me with her?" I didn't even have time to react before she was right in front of me, eyes wild. I couldn't believe what was happening. She was accusing me of cheating? When? I shot back, my anger rising. "Just hours ago. I saw you all over Mark in the backyard. You want to talk about cheating? Let's talk about it." Her face drained of color for a moment, clearly shocked that I'd thrown that in her face. But then, she recovered, straightening up and narrowing her eyes. "I wasn't cheating," she muttered. I cut her off, stepping closer. "Don't lie. I saw you two in the backyard. Don't try to make me the bad guy here, Sophia. I saw everything." For a second, I thought maybe she'd deny it, maybe try to gaslight me into thinking I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. Instead, she crossed her arms, looking more angry than sorry. "You don't get it," she spat, her voice shaking with frustration. "You're always so caught up in your own world. You don't pay attention to me. I've been lonely, Ryan, for months. I tried to talk to you, but you were too busy, too distracted. What was I supposed to do? Sit there and feel unloved while you ignored me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was trying to turn this around, making it sound like I was the one who pushed her into someone else's arms. "You're kidding me, right?" I said, my voice rising. "You think being lonely justifies kissing another man?" "Instead of sneaking around with Mark," I said, my voice low but heated, "you could have just talked to me like an adult for once." "I tried." Sophia snapped back, her face flushed, her anger boiling over. "But you never listened. You were too busy with your own shit to even notice how miserable I was." "Miserable?" I shouted. "Maybe if you weren't lying and sneaking around, things could have been different. But no, you had to ruin everything. You had to betray me." The air between us was thick with tension, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people left in the world. My hands were trembling from anger, and I could see Sophia wasn't backing down either. But before I could throw another word at her, Emily, who had been standing off to the side, quietly watching, suddenly spoke up. "Don't even try to make this about me," Emily hissed, stepping forward. "You think your excuses make any of this okay? Guess what? Mark's been lying to me too. And you think you're the only one who's been feeling neglected?" I didn't expect Emily to step in, but seeing the fire in her eyes, I understood. She wasn't just mad at Sophia. She was furious at the whole situation. At Mark, at the lies, at everything. Just as I was about to respond, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. It was Mark. He walked in, eyes scanning the room before his face dropped. He saw the mess he was now a part of. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice shaky, first looking at Emily, then at me. Emily didn't even hesitate. She spun toward him, her voice sharp. "What's going on?" How about the fact that I know you've been lying and cheating behind my back with her? She pointed to Sophia, her anger practically radiating off of her. Mark went white. Emily, listen, I don't want to hear your excuses. She cut him off, her tone as cold as ice. Ryan told me what he saw. You and Sophia sneaking around, thinking we wouldn't find out. You both disgust me. The room erupted. Emily and Mark were at each other, their voices rising as accusations flew. Mark tried to defend himself, but Emily wasn't listening. She already knew the truth. I knew it. We all did. There was no more hiding. The lies were exposed, and there was no going back. You don't get it, Emily? Mark yelled, his face red with rage. This marriage hasn't been working for a long time. It's not all my fault. Oh, don't even try that. Emily shot back, venom in her voice. You're the one who stopped trying, Mark. You checked out a long time ago. While their argument raged on, I turned to Sophia. She was standing there, watching them with a mix of anger and something else. Maybe regret, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. I'm done, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. I can't do this anymore. I don't trust you, and I don't want to be with someone who can lie to my face like you did. She didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, her expression hardening. So, what? You're just going to walk away from everything we had? Just like that? I shook my head, feeling the weight of it all. You threw it all away the moment you decided to go behind my back with Mark. Before she could say anything else, more footsteps sounded at the door. My dad, David, and Diana had arrived, likely hearing the commotion. They entered, eyes wide in confusion and shock. What's going on here? David asked, glancing from me to Sophia. He was trying to make sense of it all, but as Emily and Mark continued their yelling match, I saw the realization hit my dad. He pieced it together quickly, his face falling as he took in the scene. Diana just stood there, horrified. Everybody needs to calm down, David said, stepping into the middle of the chaos. This is getting out of hand. But it was already too late for that. The damage was done. Sophia and I were over. Emily and Mark were finished. Even David and Diana were shaken by what they walked into, and I could see the cracks forming in their own relationship too. The shouting continued, accusations flying back and forth like a storm. Through it all, one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. After what felt like hours of yelling, accusing, and all the built-up frustration being vented, we finally hit that point where there was nothing left to say. It was like the storm passed, but all that was left in the aftermath was destruction, broken trust, broken relationships, broken people. We didn't speak for a long time once the chaos calmed down. It was like we had nothing left in us to argue with. I stood there, staring at Sophia, feeling nothing but emptiness where love used to be. Maybe that was the hardest part. Not the lies, not the betrayal, but realizing that what we had wasn't real anymore. It hadn't been for a long time, and now there was nothing left to salvage. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to defend myself or argue. I just felt done. We need to end this, Sophia, I said, my voice steady but quiet. She didn't argue. She didn't even react. She just stood there, staring at the floor, like she had already known this moment was coming but had been hoping it wouldn't. We should have waited, I said, the words heavy in the silence. We should have lived our lives first before jumping into something we weren't ready for. Her eyes met mine then, and there was no anger in them anymore, only a resigned sadness. I know, she whispered. I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. I nodded. There was nothing more to say. We'd both been living in denial, thinking we could make something work that was broken from the start. Now, it was clear there was no point in trying to fix it. I'm going to file for divorce. The words felt like they were stuck in my throat, bitter but oddly fitting. It's over, Sophia. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her shoulders slumping, as though the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. Okay, she said softly. I'll go stay with my sister for a while. I'll pack my things tonight. It was strange, watching her walk away like that, knowing it was the last time. Part of me felt this overwhelming relief, but the other part felt completely numb. Emily, who had been standing quietly nearby, had been watching us. When Sophia left the room, Emily exhaled sharply, as if she had been holding her breath the entire time. I could tell she was feeling the same things I was. We had both been dragged through the same nightmare, and now we were just trying to figure out how to escape it. I can't do this with Mark anymore, Emily said, almost to herself, though I heard the resolve in her voice. I should have left him a long time ago. This affair, it's just the result of something that's been broken for a long time. Our marriage was over way before this. I looked at her, seeing the pain in her eyes, but also the acceptance. Like me, she had finally accepted the reality. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about everything that had led up to it. The lies, the distance, the lack of love. They had built something on shaky ground, and now it had all come crumbling down. I get it, I said quietly. It's not just one thing. It's everything. And when it's gone, it's gone. Emily nodded, biting her lip as if holding back tears. Yeah, I think I've known for a while that we were never really happy. I stayed because it was easier than facing the truth. But after this, I can't pretend anymore. I don't love him. I don't even know if I ever really did. Hearing her say that out loud felt like an echo of my own thoughts. We had both been living in this comfortable denial, thinking maybe things could be fixed, that if we just tried hard enough, we'd find happiness. But sometimes, there's nothing left to save. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. I'm going to leave him, Emily said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. I don't know what's next, but I know I can't stay in this mess anymore. Just then, David and Diana stepped into the room. Their faces were tight with concern, clearly shaken by what they had heard and seen. They had walked into the wreckage of our lives, probably wondering if they'd made a mistake too. What's going on? David asked, his voice heavy with worry. I didn't even know how to answer him. How do you explain everything falling apart to someone who's witnessing it firsthand? But David wasn't naive. He pieced it together fast. It's all falling apart, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. Sophia and I are done. Emily's leaving Mark. And honestly, I don't even know where to start with all of this. David's face dropped, and Diana looked like she was fighting back tears. I could tell they had hoped that this new marriage would bring everything together, but instead, it had torn everything apart. It wasn't blending families, it was shattering them. Then, almost as if on cue, David turned to Diana, his face full of uncertainty. Are we doing the right thing? He asked quietly. Maybe this was a mistake. Diana's lip trembled, but she held herself together, shaking her head. I don't know, David. I really don't. I thought we were happy, but now, seeing all this, maybe we rushed into it too. Maybe we weren't thinking clearly. It was hard to watch. My dad and Diana had seemed so sure of their new life together. But now, as they saw everything unraveling in front of them, they were questioning their own choices. The doubt was in the air now, spreading like wildfire. I love you, David said softly, taking Diana's hand. But maybe we need to take a step back. I don't want to end up like them, Diana whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Maybe you're right, she said, nodding slowly. Maybe we need to figure out what we really want, apart from all of this. I could see it so clearly now. They were falling apart too. It wasn't loud or dramatic like everything else had been. Their breakup was quieter, but just as painful. I knew, deep down, that their relationship wouldn't last either. By the end of that night, everything had changed. Sophia was gone. Emily had packed her bags, ready to leave Mark behind. And I knew, even if they didn't say it out loud, that David and Diana were on the edge of separating too. The whole weekend had been a disaster. A slow-motion train wreck where everyone's lives came crashing down at once. But, strangely, there was also a sense of relief. No more pretending. No more lies. Just a cold, hard truth. As I stood in the empty guest room later that night, I realized that this was it. The end of everything I had known for the past few years. And as terrifying as it was, I also felt something else. Peace. It was a strange kind of peace, but peace nonetheless. Because sometimes, endings are the only way to start over. A few months have passed since that night. The night everything fell apart. And honestly, it feels like it happened a lifetime ago. It's strange how time works when you're putting the pieces of your life back together. When the dust settled, Sophia was gone, and so was everything that came with her. The marriage, the dreams, the future we thought we'd have. All of it was just gone. I found a new place shortly after she left, a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. At first, the silence was unbearable. I remember those first few nights, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I ended up here. The quiet was suffocating, like an echo of everything I had lost. I kept thinking about Sophia, the fights, the distance, the betrayal. I replayed every moment in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. But as time passed, something changed. Slowly, I started to feel okay. The loneliness that terrified me at first began to feel like freedom. I wasn't tied to anything anymore. There was no one else's needs or expectations hanging over me. It was just me, and for the first time in a long time, that felt good. I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for the next fight to blow up. I could finally breathe. I was in control of my own life, and it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. After the divorce was finalized, Sophia moved to another city a few weeks later. I didn't ask where, and honestly, I didn't care. It was over. There was no us anymore, and I had come to terms with that. Her leaving didn't feel like a loss. It felt like confirmation that we had made the right call. There was no more wondering about what might have been. The distance between us wasn't just physical. It was the emotional space I needed to fully close that chapter. For the first time in years, I focused on myself. I signed up for guitar lessons. I'd always wanted to learn, but never found the time. Sitting on my balcony at dusk, strumming my guitar, felt like a moment of peace I hadn't had in a while. It was strange, but it felt right. I wasn't great at it yet, but that wasn't the point. I had something that was just for me, and that felt good. I also started running. I signed up for a marathon, even though, at first, I could barely run a few miles without wanting to collapse. But something about it kept me going. Each run felt like I was shedding another layer of who I used to be. The person who was stuck in a relationship that was all wrong. The guy who feared being alone. As the miles piled up, so did my strength. Not just physically, but mentally too. Each step forward was a reminder that I was moving on, leaving the past behind. Running became a metaphor for my life. It wasn't about speed or distance. It was about progress. One step at a time. Moving forward. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from Emily. She'd left Mark. I wasn't shocked. After everything, there was no way their marriage could survive. She suggested we meet up for coffee, and I agreed. It had been a while since that night, and I was curious about how she was holding up. When we sat down to talk, it was different. Both of us had changed. We'd been through our own hells, but we'd come out stronger for it. We talked about the mess our lives had been, about the fights, the divorces, everything. But there was no bitterness between us, just a kind of shared understanding. I don't regret any of it, Emily said, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. Yeah, it was awful, but I needed it. I needed to see how off track I'd gotten. Leaving Mark was the best decision I ever made. I'm going back to school now. It's like I'm starting over, and it feels good. I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. Same here, I replied. As bad as it was necessary. I'm better off now. For the first time in a long time, I'm focusing on myself. We both smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that signified hope for something more. It wasn't a romantic connection. It was something else, something deeper. It was a bond formed through shared survival. Two people who had been through the same storm and somehow come out on the other side, still standing. We kept in touch after that, but it remained a friendship, and that was more than enough for me. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need anyone else. For the first time in my life, I was okay with being on my own. As for David and Diana, they didn't make it either. They ended up divorcing not long after I did. I think seeing their kids' relationships fall apart forced them to take a hard look at their own marriage. They realized they weren't happy either. I still talk to my dad, but it's different now. We're both in the process of figuring out how to move forward. He's living on his own too, and I think he's okay with it. Or at least, I hope he is. There's a strange kind of closure now. Like a chapter is finally over, and a new one is just beginning. I spent a lot of time on my balcony, watching the sunsets, guitar in hand, letting my mind wander. And in those moments, I realized how much I'd changed. I wasn't the same person I was when all of this started. I was stronger, more certain of myself. Sophia was gone. Emily had moved on. Even my dad was figuring out what came next. And here I was on my own. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I actually liked it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in warm hues of orange and purple, I took a deep breath and smiled. I had made it through the storm. I was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Maybe this was for the best, I said softly to myself, the words lingering in the air as the last bit of sunlight faded away. And for the first time, I believed it.